Welcome to IP Goals, Indigenous Youth and the Right to Environment. I am your host, Dion Romano. Isa po akong staff lawyer ng Legal Rights and Natural Resources Center. Nagagalak po kami ngayong umaga na makasama kayo dito sa aming Facebook event. And to formally welcome us to this event, may I call on Attorney Mai Takeban, member of the Board of Trustees of LRC. Mai?
Thank you, Dion. I'm not a member of the Board of Trustees. I'm the ED of LRC. Una sa lahat, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Salamat sa inyong pagdalo at pagtangkilik ng ating forum. Paunang pasasalamat sa ating mga panauhing dumalo kina Representatives Argel Cabatbat, Amihilda, Sangcopan, at Alfred Vargas, and of course, our representative from the CHR, Klarise Fortaleza. Thank you all for joining us. Sa ating mga kabataang leaders, kina Jess Maridinian, Rojan Inted, Aubrey Garganera, and Samantha Cayona, thank you for joining us. Indigenous youth are only too aware of the negative impacts of environmental threats on Indigenous people's way of life, well-being, and livelihood. They know very well that they will reap the decisions our leaders will make today, for the better or for the worse, no? In our forum today, IP Goals Indigenous Youth and the Right to Environment, they, together with our student leaders, will ask our policymakers on what they can do to help Indigenous peoples access and defend the right to the environment. It is heartening to see that many of the movements we have today, especially about the environment, are organized and led by young people. It is also very timely, no? Perhaps we take inspiration from this Christmas season when we are reminded how a child became the light. Ang kabataan nga naman po ang pag-asa ng bayan. So on behalf of LRC, once again, welcome, daghang salamat, Pio Bagi.
Thank you very much, Mai, for that welcome remarks. At ngayong umaga, kagaya nga ng sabi ni Mai, may kasama tayong mga resource persons from our House of Representatives at Commission on Human Rights. At para introduce ko sa inyo yung unang magsasalita or magbabahagi, she is currently the Deputy Division Chief of the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Center under the Center's Management Office of the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines. Her work in the ESCR Center focuses mainly on business and human rights, environment and climate change, human settlements, and indigenous peoples. She has been in the development and human rights work since 2010, where she worked for both non-governmental organizations and government institutions. May I now share the screen to Ms. Klarise Fortaleza for her speech for this event.
Maraming salamat, Dion. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. Magandang umaga sa ating mga participants, sa panelists, and of course, sa resource speakers natin, and of course, to all our viewers. Also, would like to thank LRC for giving the Commission on Human Rights the opportunity to talk about the role of Indigenous youth in environmental conservation. It is always a pleasure to take part in this kind of conversation, as the issue of environmental degradation and climate change is very timely and relevant, sabi nga ni Attorney Mai kanina. We are all now experiencing the adverse effects of climate change and we need to act now. It is estimated that at least a quarter of the world's land area is owned, managed, or occupied by Indigenous peoples and local communities. We know that Indigenous peoples and local communities have an intimate relationship with their land, and their culture is intertwined with the land they inhabit. They depend on the land for their day-to-day subsistence, food, medicine, and cultural practices. The role of Indigenous peoples in caring for and protecting the environment has been emphasized and lauded in various literature, stemming from the assertion that the Indigenous people's way of life and identity are linked to their land. However, their traditional lands have been affected by environmental degradation, deforestation, development projects, mining, and large infrastructure projects such as dams, among others. Their land is likewise directly affected by the adverse effects of climate change. More often than not, Indigenous peoples are not consulted and included in the approval process of these projects, and they learn of these proposed activities only when bulldozers arrive. Many peoples have been forcibly evicted from their traditional lands, and when they resist eviction, many have been harassed and even killed. The Global Witness reports that the Philippines has become even deadlier for activists since 2018, having been consistently named as one of the worst places in Asia for attacks against defenders. So that includes land and environmental defenders. This is happening all in the face of the climate crisis. Globally, as reported by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, nature is declining at rates unprecedented in human history, and the impact of climate change and ecosystem change has directly impacted local economies, livelihoods, food security, health, and quality of life. It has also been estimated that young people comprise a huge part of the world's population, and they will have to bear the consequences of current environmental degradation. Future generations will also be affected by the decisions of the current generation and the extent to which they have addressed concerns such as depletion of resources, biodiversity loss, including the loss of cultural and natural heritage. In this regard, the young people, particularly the indigenous youth, have a significant role to play in protecting and improving the environment. This can be through the preservation of traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and its transmission between generations. Traditional knowledge is at the core of indigenous identity, culture, languages, heritage, and livelihoods. And this knowledge has a pivotal place in the range of actions needed to mitigate climate change and push for climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. We need to look deeper into indigenous knowledge, their sustainable practices, and land and resource management, as well as the role of indigenous communities, young people, and women. In practical terms, traditional knowledge can be transmitted between generations through stories, songs, dancings, carvings, paintings, and performances. We emphasize the importance of having an integrated system of knowledge in which indigenous peoples will have the opportunity not only to share their experiences to overcome future challenges, but also to be active agents of change by being involved in the decision-making processes. We need to ensure that indigenous educational practices, languages, environmental conservation and management are respected so that these knowledge, systems, and practices are preserved and transmitted between and to future generations. It is high time that the government, business enterprises, and other concerned stakeholders work together to protect and preserve these knowledge systems and practices because these systems are deeply rooted in local ecology and are valuable agents in maintaining global diversity and building resilience against climate change. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clarice, for sharing with us the narration of the situation of the IP communities and for emphasizing the role of youth in popularizing the situation of the IP partner communities. Thank you very much. For our second speaker, we are happy that we are joined today by the representative of MAGSASAKA Partylist. May I now turn over the screen to Congressman Argel Joseph Cabatbat. All right, maybe before, while we're waiting for Congressman Argel, all right, sure. So before we ask Congressman Argel to share his opening statement, We will first show you or share you the opening statement of one of the representative from the House of Representatives. He is the representative of the 5th District of Quezon City, Congressman Alfred Vargas III.
Sa aking mga kapwa tagapagsalita ngayong umagang ito, sa ating butihing Legislative Advocacy Leader ng LRC, Ms. Maya Quirino, sa mga grupo na mag-aaral mula sa PUP at Ateneo de Manila University, sa ating mga manonood, naway mapasa ating lahat ang pinakamagandang bahagi ng araw na ito. This representation is indeed very honored to be invited in today's event. LRC has originally invited the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Lord Alan Velasco. But due to his fully booked schedule, he asked the Committee on Ecology, Chairperson Glo Labad-Labad, to speak on his behalf. Unfortunately, the good chairperson has also previous commitments to her constituents in her district, which she has to immediately attend to. So, she and the speaker requested me to deliver to you this message. I couldn't be more happy with the task, learning that vigorous youths are in attendance. Upon seeing the directive to deliver a short message on the role of youth in environmental conservation, I thought it futile to list down all the possible legislative measures in Congress pertaining to the topic, because by now most of you must have researched it on the internet already. In like manner, Googling on the issue and nonchalantly reciting it in your hearing would undermine the intelligence of this audience. Likewise, I cannot attend empty-handed. Though I have filed numerous environmental measures, I still cannot claim that I am an expert in the field of environmental preservation. Subalit naririto po ako ngayon bilang mangbabatas na may bukas na puso para pakinggan ang inyong mga saloobin at hangarin, at sa munti ko pong paraan ay paparating ko at idudulog ko ang mga ito sa mga kapwa ko mangbabatas sa kapulungan ng Kongreso. We recognize that like a youngling to its mother, so it is with the indigenous peoples with their ancestral land. Their land is of utmost importance to them more than anything else. It is the heart and soul of who they are. Left alone, they can thrive like their ancestors. Our IP's dependence on their land for daily living and survival has brought about a strong need for them to conserve it. From one generation to another, the IPs pass down traditions on how to conserve the land. Hence, they are regarded as the best people to conserve the land. Just take a look at the country of Bhutan, which is located high up in the eastern Himalayas and one of the greenest countries in the globe, the country of Bhutan. The country's carbon negative status puts the rest of the world to shame, showing that being a good steward of the environment can be done without any excuses. Their people have a strong collective effort to protect their forests, even if it means forsaking great economic rewards of development and progress interventions which are not environmentally sustainable. In our country, with the IPRA law in effect, the shield for the rights of the IPs should have been very strong with a free, prior, and informed consent clause. as one of the best armors. The IPs, as the rightful owner of their land, should really have total control of all the activities, projects, or programs within their territory. Dismally, like all the numerous well-crafted laws in this country, with its flawed implementation, having no teeth is deemed a mere law and can't serve its very purpose. This is where one of the key roles of the youth as vanguards of the environment comes in. Building public awareness is a key factor in the implementation. What you are doing right now, holding this forum, is a laudable platform for your voices to be heard. This is, in itself, another way of brandishing your spears to wade your way through victory. I can go on and on, but without so much ado, to give more time to the cause of this affair, I deem it proper to stop at this point and allow me to seize this opportunity to convey my salute to the youth, who I believe is the last defense of our beloved environment. I want to encourage you, especially most of you young ones, who are still full of enthusiasm or passion and vigor, to stand and fight for your rights. For the IP youths in particular, the rights to your land, and for the Filipino youth in general, the right to live in a beautiful environment. Not just for this generation, but for your children's children. Maraming salamat po at naway mapa sa atin ang awa ng Poong May Kapal. Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much, Cong Alfred, for that very encouraging message. I think Cong Alfred echoed very clearly yung mensahe din ng LRC regarding the ancestral domain as the heart and soul of the IP communities. And they are really the best people to conserve the land, and their right to the free, prior, and informed consent is the manifestation of their right to self-determination. And of course, we're very happy to listen to the call of Cong Alfred to the youth as our defender of the future and the environment. Maraming salamat muli, Cong Alfred, for that message. Kasama din natin ngayong umaga at nagagalak tayo na makasama ang isa din sa mga congressman mula sa House of Representatives representing MAGSASAKA Partylist. Magandang umaga, Cong Argel Joseph Cabatbat. Bigay ko na sa iyo, Cong Argel, yung screen for your opening statement.
Yes, thank you. Good morning to our fellow guest speakers, to our youth, to our indigenous youth. Sa lahat po ng nakikinig, magandang umaga po. Before I begin my short message, I would like to say that I think there are three speakers here who will discuss about the role of indigenous youth in environment preservation. But please indulge me if I will slightly veer away from the assigned topic. Instead, I would like to discuss why the indigenous youth is the best spokesperson and crusader for environmental conservation. Hindi na tayo dapat maghanap pa ng iba. Sila talaga, and I will discuss why. But before I proceed, let me first discuss some miscellaneous facts. There are estimated to be around 14 to 17 million IPs in the Philippines, belonging to 110 ethno-linguistic group. IPs are mainly concentrated sa Cordillera, Autonomous Region, and in Mindanao. And IPs make up 1/3 of the world's poorest, suffering disproportionately in health, education, inclusion, and human rights. So ito sa statistics, let's humanize the statistics. The IPs are suffering. Alam niyo po yan, they eat adversity injustice, poverty, and harassment for breakfast. For lack of a better term, sa Tagalog parang ang tawag sa kanila kawawa. Parang kawawa naman sila. And let me elaborate later why this kawawa sila or adversity on our IPs is actually not a curse. Without glorifying resiliency, as I don't want to glorify resiliency, I would still like to argue why adversity can actually be a gift. Siguro magsimula ako sa sarili ko when I joined the House of Representatives last year. I take pride in the fact that I was born to a poor family. My father is a farmer and my mother was an OFW. So we struggled as a family, but fortunately all of my siblings, including me, graduated. Yung aking pong kapatid na lalaki ay CPA at yung aking yung bunso naming kapatid na babae ay graduate ng UP. Scientist na po siya. PhD in physics. But our struggles are nothing compared to the daily struggles of the indigenous people and the IP youth. And I would like to ask why our adversity is an essential element of success. And in our discussion, the success in preserving the environment. Kumbaga, hindi tayo magiging successful sa pag-defend ng environment if we did not suffer adversity and rose above it. I will be heavily quoting the book of Malcolm Gladwell. Isa po sa mga paborito ko yung libro. You should buy all of his books para sa inyo pong mga nakikinig. Napakaganda. He discussed about the stories of success as to why luck is important but hard work is essential. One of the controversial findings dun sa libro is about orphans. Out of the 573 successful people that were interviewed, 25% of them lost a parent, at least one parent before the age of 10. And by the age of 15, 34% ang namatayan ng isang magulang. And by the age of 20, 45% sa kanila yung namatayan ng magulang. Alam niyo yun, imagine the adversity suffered by the child who lost a parent at that age. So kumbaga, what can be worse than that? So alam niyo yun, ang theory ko naman dyan, kung ikaw ay naulila ng ganyang edad, yung mga petty, hindi naman petty problems, pero yung mga usual problems na dinaranas ng mga kabataan, wala na sa kanila yan. Diba? So, meron din sa libro about the 10,000 hours rule. Na if you want to be considered as an expert on a certain field, you should spend 10,000 hours training, studying about that field, at doon ka talaga ma-consider na world class. Ang moral lesson doon sa 10,000 hours rule, there is no overnight success. Talagang pinaghihirapan yan. And imagine, yung pong ating mga IPs, there are no concrete roads going to school, no electricity, under extreme poverty, and other kinds of adversities. Ito yung huhubog sa karakter ng tao, na yung disiplina na gigising ka ng madaling araw para pumasok ng eskwelahan at magtitiis para sa kakarampot na perang hawak mo para mabili yung mga karapat-dapat lang. Ito yung huhubog ng karakter ng IP. So, meron, siguro years from now, may lalabas na IP youth leader na magtatanggol para sa environment natin. And I'm pretty sure na dumaan siya sa ganitong klaseng adversity. Baga, mayabang na ako, nagaling ako sa hirap, pero wala yang kumpara sa hirap ng dinaranas na isang IPU. So kumbaga, kung mamimili tayo ng spokesperson dito for the environmental protection, alam niyo, IP Youth is especially situated and the best person to be the crusader and spokesperson para sa environment protection. Kasi they live or they are situated near the environment that we intend to protect. And they have the credentials to speak for its protection. So ako sa mga nakikinig na IP youth sa atin, you should not look down on your adversities. Take pride in it. Take up a cause bigger than yourselves. Wala na kasing ibang pwedeng magsalita dyan, kundi kayo. Lalo na pag pinagdaanan niyo yung ganitong hirap at kayo yung naging spokesperson, imagine if ibang tao yan na hindi dumana sa ganyang paghihirap, konting pressure lang, bibigay na yan. Pero kayo, na alam ninyo kung ano talaga yung sinasabi nyo at alam niyo yung pinagdaanan ninyo, people will listen when you speak. So, yun po ang aking maikli lang na mensahe. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pakikinig. Unfortunately, baka hindi po ako makasama sa Q&A dahil nasa committee hearing din po ako ng trade and industry. So my apologies. I have to leave early. Sana po may napulot kayong kahit kaunti sa aking talumpati. At sana po mula dito sa mga nakikinig dito, may magising at mag-take ng lead para sa protection ng ating environment. Yun lang po. Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat, Cong Argel, for that very personal sharing or statement. And I think mamaya, although nasabi mo na, Cong Argel, that you cannot stay until the end, but later we have IP youth leaders that will be also sharing and raising questions. And maganda po yung mensahe na yung disiplina, perseverance, the way you experience it personally. And I think sa mga nakakasama namin ng mga IP youth, ganun din po sila. And tama po kayo that they are the best spokesperson that could speak of their own struggle, their own triumph and success. And salamat po sa pag-recognize sa role ng mga IP youth. And sa lahat ng nakikinig ng mga kabataan, ng mga IP, siguro i-take on natin to as challenge yung mga shinare ni Cong Argel. So maraming salamat, Cong Argel. At siguro sa mga susunod na trabaho regarding po sa mga issues ng IP ay work kami with your office para po matulungan po natin yung mga IP youth natin. Maraming salamat muli, Cong Argel. So,
Thank you.
Thank you po ulit. Ngayon naman, para sa susunod na magbabahagi ng kanyang opening statement, siya ang representative ng AMIN or Anak Mindanao Partylist. Siya din ay yung Vice Chairperson of the Committee of Indigenous Cultural Communities and Indigenous Peoples and Vice Chairperson of the Committee of Muslim Affairs. And recently, she was elected as Assistant Majority Leader in the House of Representatives. I-welcome natin at ibibigay ko na yung screen kay Cong Amihilda Sangcopan.
Maraming salamat, Dion. Auzubillahi minasyaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. To the officers and staff of the Legal Rights and Natural Resources, university officials, faculty members, and student bodies of the Ateneo, the Davao, and Polytechnic University of the Philippines, Manila, guests and the organizers of this activity, isang magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. It is good to be here today and to be speaking on a passion and one of the key principles na tinatayuan at tinutungtungan ng partito na aking kinakatawan sa Kamara, and which is the concerns and issues at kung ano po yung buhay ng ating mga lumad sa Mindanao at ng indigenous people sa pangkalahatang ng ating bansa. It is an honor to be surrounded by our country's future crusaders and stalwarts na kayo po ang susunod sa aming mga yapak that will uphold the rights and dignities of our indigenous peoples and the country's natural environment. Kami po ay naniniwala sa inyo, aming mga kabataan, na kayo ang magiging backbone ng ating society and will hold the power to shift the dynamics of our nation. By using your knowledge, your experience, your successes, and even your failures, your strengths most especially your weaknesses. You can influence decision makers like us to demand earnest change and the capability to sway lifestyle, traditions, systems, and even institutions like the House of Representatives. This is why activities such as this is one of my priority, as this is very important for me because it allows me to address and to remind you of your crucial and effective role today and for our future. When it comes to promoting and maintaining the sustainability of our indigenous communities and of the environment, it is you who will have to deal with the consequences of the choices and actions made by those who precedes you. Sa ngayon pa lang po, kung sakaling kami na nauna sa inyong manungkulan sa ating bayan ay magkamali sa mga pulisiyang aming ipasa, ako ay humihingi po ng tawad. Pero kung kami po ay sa tingin ninyo ay kinailangan yung suportahan para takbo natin kung ano yung mga polisiya na kakailangan ninyo po para masuportahan kayo. Andito po ang anak Mindanao na sasamahan kayo. Kaya't kung meron kayo na sa tingin ninyo na magagawa na ngayon, gawin po natin ng sabay-sabay. Andito lang po kaming nakakatanda nyo, naaalalay sa inyo. No one is too young to act on sound, sustainable choices for you, for your children's future, and for the generations yet to come. Kayo ang ngayon at ang bukas. IP communities are instrumental in protecting and conserving the remaining natural forests of our country, our wetlands, our oceans, our different bodies of water. And the role of the IPs and our relationship to the environment goes hand in hand. Doing or saving one while neglecting the other is and should never be an option. Indigenous peoples are expected to continue having a vital role for environmental protection. They are our prime environmentalists. For them, the environment is not just home or livelihood. These are sacred spaces or ritual grounds where forests, mountains, indigenous territories, and cultural landscapes or seascapes are places where they connect with the divine. From this belief system that are deeply rooted in their spiritual reverence for nature, societies can learn ways of living in harmony with the environment. But these contributions and importance to society, indigenous peoples remain in constant struggle to make their voices heard, whether in asserting their basic rights to land ownership or respect for their cultural beliefs and practices. The primary factors that threaten their areas and erode the role of indigenous leadership in conservation are habitat loss and degradation, erosion of traditional governance, including loss of cultural links, traditional knowledge, and the management of practices. And like the generation before us, today's indigenous youth continue to face racism and discrimination and are marginalized in our society. As a Moro woman, I too am familiar with this sentiment. But despite these challenges, we have that sense of belongingness and strong cultural identity that propels us to be more resilient individuals. Allow me to continue to encourage you to stay focused because you have always been focused and you serve as the watchdog of this government, of our government. Make the leaders of this country listen. Make them lean and lend their ears and listen with a desire to understand you, how you want your future to be. It was indeed an honor on my part as Vice Chair of the House Committee on Indigenous Cultural Communities and Indigenous People to chair the technical working group that consolidated House Bill number 639 and 2281 filed by Deputy Speaker Lauren Legarda and Congresswoman Malu Acosta Alba. The substitute bill have been approved by the House Committee on Indigenous Cultural Communities and Indigenous Peoples. The said measures recognizes the indigenous cultural communities and indigenous peoples community conserved territories and areas, or what we call ICA, establishing for the purpose the National ICA Registry. Let us make IP rights and environmental protection high on the political agenda. As one of the proverbs read, we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. Ang lahat na ito ay hindi namin minana mula sa ating mga ninuno, bagkos Ito ay sa inyo na amin lamang hinirap. Patuloy kayong mangarap. Sasama po kami sa inyo sa pangangarap na patuloy pang may gubat na masisilayan, may malinis na tubig na maiinom, bundok na maakyat at higit sa lahat, manatili ang mga lupain sa pag-aari ng ating mga katutubo. To the youth, be heard, be trained, and be informed. You have every right to demand for better policies, better education, better politics, and a better tomorrow from us, your current leaders. And lastly, I implore you to continue guarding your hearts. Nakatanim na dyan ang adikaing itaguyod, ang karapatan ng ating mga katutubo at ang pagmamahal sa ating kalikasan. Guard them tight dahil nagmumula sa ating puso ang ating pagkilos tungo sa tunay na pagbabago para sa ating bayan, para sa ating kinabukasan. Bilang aking panghuli, nais ko kayong hikayatin na samahan ang representasyong ito at ang Anak Mindanao Partylist na maipasa, na hikayatin ng aking mga kasamahan, si Congressman Argel Cabatbat, maging si Congressman Alfred Vargas, kung pwedeng samahan tayo na mailabi na maipasa ang House Bill number 3641 na ating pong final. The subject measure seeks to establish a national wetland policy and the provision of mechanisms for the institutionalization of this policy. Muli, isang magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dion.
Maraming salamat, Kong Amihilda, for that very reassuring statement. Napakaganda po na marinig sa isang member ng House of Representatives na bukas para mag-demand or sabihin sa mga kabataan na okay na mag-demand ng accountability at mag-demand ng better politics and policy. And siguro mamaya sa ating mga tanong mula sa IP Youth Leaders, makikita natin yung mga issues na nararanasan nila and mapapakinggan natin yung response from our resource persons kung ano yung mga mungkahi na pwedeng we can work together para mas maging better yung situation. At parang refreshing din, Kong Amihilda, to listen to you sharing po yung mga efforts and initiative na ginagawa nyo for the IP communities and yung reassurance that mayroong role ang youth, especially the IP youth, para yun nga po mag-demand ng pagbabago at better politics. So maraming salamat for that statement, Kong Amihilda. So ngayon na po sa bahaging ito, meron po tayong mga kasama na IP youth leaders na magre-raise ng mga katanungan at mga issues na kinakaharap nila. So unahin ko po yung representative from the Tedoray and Lambangian youth. He's one of the council members of the Tedoray and Lambangian Youth and Student Association. He is also a technical staff of Timway Justice Governance or TJG, the traditional governance of the Tedoray and Lambangian indigenous peoples in South Central Mindanao. He is also a member of Asian Environmental Youth Network, Human Rights Youth Action Network, and Amnesty International Philippines. Kasama natin ngayon si Rojan Inted para magbigay ng kanyang katanungan para sa ating mga resource persons. Rojan, ibigay ko sa iyo yung screen.
Okay, good morning po, Congresswoman Sangcopan at sa lahat po. So, ang unang tanong ko po ay para sa iyo. So, again, my name is Rojan Ented, representing the Tedoray and Lambangian indigenous peoples in South Central Mindanao. Ang katanungan ko po ay tungkol sa mga issues and concerns namin bilang mga non-Moro indigenous peoples sa loob ng bagong itinatag na Bangsamoro government. Since kayo po ay may malalim na karanasan sa usaping batas at silbing boses din ng bayan sa Kongreso, so gusto ko lang po ikot yung isang provision sa RA 11054 sa Article 9 of the RA 11054 or Bangsamoro Organic Law under the Basic Rights. Tapos sa Section 3, sabi niya dito, this organic law shall not in any manner diminish the rights and benefits of the non-Moro indigenous peoples in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao under the Constitution, national laws, particularly RA 8371, otherwise known as Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997. So, ang tanong ko po dito, bakit iba ang aming nararamdaman, no, na nararanasan sa aming mga komunidad bilang katutubo sa sinasabi ng batas? Dahil una po, ang tanong ko, sa pagpasa ng Bangsamoro Transition Authority ng Resolution 38 last 2018 na pasamantalang ihinto ang delineation process ng NCIP sa aming ancestral domain in Maguindanao, which is under ARM pa, no, ang pagpuprocess, at dumadin kami sa legal na proseso. Tapos the time, kabubuo pa lang ng BTA, ng Bangsamoro Transition Authority, ay nagpasa na ng ganong resolution, no, na which is clearly na nakabiolate doon sa sinasabi ng batas. Tapos ito po ba ay paglabag sa RA 11054 Section 3? Din po yun ang unang katanungan ko. Pangalawa po, bakit continuous ang paghaharas sa mga katutubo sa loob ng kanilang lupaing ninuno sa kabila ng pandemya, particularly in South UP Municipality hanggang ngayon, no? So ngayon pa ay continuous pa rin ng displacement ngayon. Tapos ang mga isyong ito ay walang konkretong mekanismo ang BARM para ayusin dahil nag-uugat ito sa usaping lupa na tila hindi rin naririnig o napag-uusapan sa national governments. Ano po yung sagot niyo po dyan? Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Rojan. Dion, can I answer the question of Rojan?
Yes.
Okay. Rojan, maraming salamat sa pagpapaabot sa kinatawang ito sa inyong concern, mga tituray. Lagi po ako napupunta sa South UP. Actually, I love your place. Gustuhin ko man po kayo bigyan ng konkretong kasagutan. Ang naging responsibilidad po namin sa Kongreso is tugunan yung struggle ng Bangsamoro. At yun ay ang pagpasa ng Bangsamoro Organic Law. Nagawa na po namin at nasa level na po tayo na ngayon ng implementasyon. Ang tanong ko po, ang alam ko may mga appointed na members ng Bangsamoro Transition Authority na siya ngayon namumuno sa BARM government na nagre-represent po sa ating indigenous peoples within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. Siguro magbabalik po ako ng katanungan, Rojan, kung pwede mo akong sagutin. Hindi po ba kayo pinovidean ng mekanismo na pakinggan kayo ng inyong mga liderato sa BARM government? Kung ang magiging sagot mo sa akin ay walang klarong mekanismo, bukas po ang tanggapan ko para tanggapin ang inyong concern. Kung kinailangan po natin na mag-file ng House Resolution para tignan po ito ng appropriate committee, ang inyong concern, gagawin po natin yan. Provide nyo lang po ako ng necessary documents na aking tutungtungan. Isang statement or position paper mula po sa Teguray ng Banyan. Matagal na po namin gusto na kayo ay upuan at kausapin. Kahit po siguro sa isang Zoom meeting katulad nito ay isang malaking bagay po para sa akin. So alam ko na nandito baka kasama rin po natin ang Chief of Staff ng Anak Mindanao Partylist, kasama ko at katuwang ko sa Kongreso. Handa kami, Rojan, if ever yun, if you could possibly give the contact details of Rojan para maupuan ito and then makapagtulungan, then pakinggan natin kung anong sasabihin ng BARM government. Nung ipinasa po natin ng BBL, naging bahagi po tayo noon. We actively participate. Anak Mindanao actively campaign for its passage, eventually for its ratification. So kung sa tingin nyo po ay may kailangan pa tayong gawin. Kasi lahat naman po ng human laws, may flows po yan siya. Sa bandang huli, pag may nakita tayong loopholes, andito po kayo para tumulong sa inyo. So we would gladly represent you in Congress and be your voice kung kinailangan, Roja.
Thank you po, Congresswoman.
Thank you, Kong Amihilda, for being open. And siguro nakuha ko doon sa response ni Kong Amihilda na bukas yung kanyang opisina para makipagtulungan at mapakinggan yung mga issues ng mga Teduray na nasa Bangsamoro. At siguro pagkatapos nitong ating event na to, magpa-follow through tayo doon sa nabanggit nga na action steps. So maraming salamat Cong for that openness. Ngayon naman and also kay Klarise, feel free to also respond to the question. Siguro yung pangalawang tanong na or pangalawang representative ng IPUs na tatanong, introduce ko lang muna siya. Siya ay representative naman galing sa Tiboli Manubo Youth Rep. She is currently taking Bachelor of Science in Tourism at Ramon Magsaysay Memorial Colleges. At ngayon ay meron siyang recorded message at tanong na pwedeng magbigay ng response si Kong Amihilda at saka si Klarise.
Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Ako nga po pala si Jesmay Grace Didinyan, isang kabataang katutubo na nagmula sa tribo ng Tiboli, Manubo. Hindi pa man nag-uumpisa ang pandemya, may problema na kaming hinaharap. Patungkol ito sa malaking coffee plantation sa aming lupang ninuno, dito po sa South Cotabato at Sultan Kudarat. Sa malapad at malawak na lupain ng aming mga ninuno, kakaunting area lamang po ang aming natataniman at hindi po kami nagbigay ng free prior and informed consent or FPIC sa renewal permit sa kanila. Ano po kaya ang maaaring hakbang upang maibalik sa amin ang aming kakayahan na makapagsaka at makapaghanap buhay? Ano-ano ang maaari ninyong maitulong sa amin upang maibalik ang aming lupa?
Salamat Jess Marie para sa inyong katanungan at nakabalik po si Kong Argel Cabatbat sa ating event. Maraming salamat Kong Argel. Perhaps we can address the question to Kong Argel. Yung katanungan ni Jess Marie ay regarding doon sa kanilang ancestral domain na sinasabi ng mga IPUs ng Tiboli na hindi sila nagbigay ng consent or yung FPIC process ay hindi nasunod. At ngayon ay yung ancestral domain ay hindi sila makapasok, di sila makapag-tanim at makapag-ani. Ngayon nagtatanong siya kung ano yung pwedeng mamungkahi bilang kinatawan ng Kongreso para ma-address yung issue at concern nila sa South Cotabato. Kong Argel?
Yes, thank you. Bumalik ako kanina sa committee hearing namin. Matagal pa pala yung aking speech doon. So, andito ulit ako. Anyway, ang practice, before I joined the House of Representatives, ako po kasi ay isang litigation lawyer na mahawak tayo ng mga kaso ng mga informal settlers, kababaihan, pati yung mga issue sa agrarian rights. Pati na din po yung sa mga ating mga katutubo. Ang may papayo ko, baka po pwedeng makipag-ugnayan kayo diretso sa aming opisina. Dahil ang practice ko kasi, gusto ko makuha lahat ng dokumento bago ako magbigay ng legal advice at maglatag kung paano natin yun mapapawin. So, doon po sa ating kasama na katutubo from Tiboli, Manobo, bukas po ang aming opisina. Please makipag-coordinate po kayo at para ma-investigahan natin yan, makuha ko lahat ng mga kailangang dokumento para malaman natin kung paano yung approach, paano natin mababawi ang lupa. Kasi kung totoo na wala namang informed prior consent, ito ay napakalaking basis para mabawi ang lupa na yan. Marami kasing mga ganyang kaso ng pag pamimeke ng titulo, pamimeke ng affidavit, pamimeke ng pirma, o kuminsan naman hindi peke pirma pero hinaharas naman yung mga tao. Anyway, maraming remedyo ang batas para dyan. Ang first step lang po natin, please may pag-ugnayan po kayo sa opisina natin.
Thank you, Kong Argel, for that response. At tinake note po namin yung pagiging bukas ng inyong opisina para makipagtulungan na ma-address po yung issues and concerns ng mga Tiboli sa South Cotabato. So salamat po Kong Argel. At salamat ulit po sa pagbalik po dito sa event para mag-participate dito sa ating town hall. So salamat po. Sunod naman na youth representative natin.
Sorry, Dia. Excuse me. Pwede akong mag-respond dun sa concern ni Jess? Alright. Sorry to interrupt, no. Sa CHR kasi, as the National Human Rights Institution of the Philippines, meron kaming three primary mandates. Yun yung protection of human rights, promotion ng human rights, and sa policy making. So with regard to the concern of Jess, in terms of protection, we can actually conduct fact-finding investigation. And since we are in a very unique position to bridge the sector and the government, we can conduct a multi-sectoral and interagency dialogue so that we can thresh out the issues, surface ano ba yung talagang nangyayari doon sa lugar nila, ano yung mga important na mga facts na kailangan nating malaman para makita natin saan tayo papasok at saan makakatulong ang gobyerno o sino ba ang nagkamali sa sitwasyon na ito. Maganda ang multi-sectoral dialogue kasi nandyan ang mga concerned stakeholders including yung mga government agencies, pwedeng kasama ang NCIP at iba pang mga government agencies para makasagot sa atin, makasagot sa mga concerns ng community ni Jess. So doon kami pwedeng makapasok. And also doon sa promotion ng human rights, pwede rin tayong makatulong sa pagpapopularize o mag-raise ng awareness doon sa area nila about human rights. So doon pwede talaga makatulong ang CHR. And of course, tulad nga ng nasabi din ng dalawa po nating representatives, bukas din ang opisina ng CHR para tumanggap ng mga hinaing ng mga kasama natin sa IPs para ma-monitor din natin ano ba ang ginagawa ng government sa mga projects and programs na ginagawa ng government in response to human rights obligations nila. So yon.
Salamat Klarise sa pag-respond. Tama yan na yung multi-sectoral dialogue kasi yung issue na kinakaharap ng mga IP communities, yung mga kabataan at IP communities in general ay involved talaga yung iba't ibang ahensya ng gobyerno, NCIP, DNR at yung minumungkahi mo na multi-sectoral dialogue will be a way to thresh out nga yung issue at salamat sa pagbubukas din ng CHR at ng opisina nyo para matulungan na ma-address itong mga concerns na to. Salamat. Meron pa tayong mga mga youth representatives na mag-raise or magbibigay din ng katanungan. Introduce ko na yung susunod na representative. Siya ay second year BS Environmental Science na student ng Ateneo de Davao University. She is also the Secretary General of Samahan, the official student government of Ateneo de Davao. And she's currently leading the Tayo para sa Tampakan, a student-led initiative aimed to resist mining in Tampakan in South Cotabato.
Excuse me, Dion. Before that, can we give the floor to Cong Amihilda? She has something to say in response to Jess Marie. You were raising your hand earlier.
Sure, sorry, hindi ko po napansin yung yung notification. Cong, go ahead po for your response.
Okay, yun. Na-elaborate mo na din talaga siya. Gaya ng sinabi ni Clarice, mahalaga ang multi-stakeholder na dialogue. We always believe in dialogue and conversations. Somehow, when we had the opportunity to meet with leaders of the Tiboli tribe in General Santos City, if I'm not mistaken, nailatag na po nila yung concern na yan. At sa parte po namin, we initially have set a meeting with the Tiboli leaders kasama ng NCIP na sumasakop sa kanilang lugar. Pero sa tingin ko, kailangan pa po natin palawagin, palawagin ito na mag-invite ng iba pang institutions of the government, and probably the Legal Resource Center would be able to help our IPs in bridging this. And us in Anak Mindanao can also try to be a bridge for you to meet with them. Yun lang. And gaya ng sinabi po ni Kong Argel, tayo sumususog na bukas po ang ating we just needed documents kasi at least kailangan namin may matungtungan kami.
Thank you, Kong. Well noted po yung response mo at kami din po sa LRC ay magiging tulay para mas mapadali at mas ipaabot namin yung mga concerns ng IP partner communities ng LRC. So salamat po dyan sa response mo, Kong. So siguro ulitin ko yung introduction ko sa susunod nating youth representative mula naman sa Davao. Yun nga, siya yung current na leading the project, yung Tayo para sa Tampakan. Ito yung student-led initiative aimed to resist mining in Tampakan, South Cotabato. So para magbigay ng ating kanyang katanungan, inanyayahan ko si Samantha Cayona from Ateneo de Davao University. Sam?
Hello sir, good morning po sa ating lahat. I am here representing the Samahan, the student government of Ateneo de Davao University College Unit. I am currently in my second year with the course BS Environmental Science. So in our discussions in our course, we often talk about climate change. And it is our reality now that we are experiencing it already. And of course, we are yet to experience the worst of climate change. In the Philippines alone this year, we experienced 3 strong typhoons in small time intervals, and this is not normal. The devastating impacts of the typhoon were pointed out by President Duterte himself and some of his cabinet secretaries to have been aggravated by mining activities on the areas that should have been protected in Luzon. In Mindanao, there is a widely disputed mining project in South Cotabato, the Tampakan Mining Project, which will be permanently altering 10,000 hectares of land and will be affecting 4 municipalities. Almost 4,000 hectares of rainforest will also be cleared, and our brothers and sisters from the Blaan tribe will also be displaced or directly affected by this project. The previous speakers highlighted that we really need to mitigate the effects of climate change urgently. And of course, certainly, damaging 10,000 hectares of land with rich biodiversity, fauna and flora in the face of the growing threats of climate change is not the best direction that we can take. And of course, we need to talk about how we are going to move forward and respond to it. In line with this, I wish to ask both members of the Congress in the Zoom room, what are your points of action as a legislator to respond to the growing problem of mining in our country, or specifically in Mindanao as well, and perhaps in responding to the issue of climate change in general? So that's my question po. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Any from our resource person from the House of Representatives? And of course, Klarise can also respond to the question of Sam. Si Kong Argel, naka-open na yung mic. Baka gustong mauna ni Kong Argel.
Yes, thank you. About that issue on mining, I think there's a need for us to amend the Philippine Mining Act of 1995. Aside from being a litigation lawyer, for a time, may mga hinawakan din akong mining cases. Nagkakaso kami ng mga mining companies na involved sa irresponsible mining. Ang nakakalungkot, yung batas natin, pagka nakasira ka ng property ng gobyerno, for example, mga poste, ganyan, nakukulong ka. Kaya nakabangga ka ng sasakyan, pwede ka makulong. Pero pagka nakasira ka ng 12 bundok at libu-libong mga puno at nakasira ka ng napakalawak na ilog o kaya naman ay dagat, walang kulong. Yun yung masakit. Kaya kailangan i-amend natin na bigyan natin ng penal provision naman yung Mining Act. Alam niyo, naintindihan natin na marami sa mga colleagues natin sa Congress business ay mining. Alam niyo, wala namang masama sa mining kasi diyan nanggagaling yung mga sasakyan, tinitor, lahat ng mga utensils, electronics, diyan nanggagaling. Kailangan lang responsable. At yung mga kasamahan naman natin diyan, alam natin, responsable naman sila. Kaya lang, kung may batas na ganyan, magiging subject yan to abuse. Monitor lahat. Ano ang pangahawakan natin para kapag nakasira sila ng kalikasan, may parusa. Kasi tinignan ko, binasa ko yung debate sa Senado, sa Kongreso, wala talaga akong nakita ng penal provision na i-take up. So I think that is one of the aspect of Philippine Mining Act that needs to be improved.
Salamat kong Argel, at siguro sa bahaging ito gusto ko rin idagdagan kasi yung LRC po ay sinusulong yung tinatawag na Alternative Minerals Management Bill. At siguro matagal na rin po itong naka-pending sa Kongreso, at perhaps maganda tong start na yung sinasabi nga ni Kong Argel na baka tingnan natin yung penal provision. Dun sa AMMB, meron dong penal provision para mas maging stricter yung rules natin in case of violation dun sa environment at mga proseso na hindi nasunod. So thank you Kong Argel for that response. Si Klarise, naka-open din.
Yes, please. In response doon sa concern, actually sa Commission on Human Rights, for the information of everyone, we conducted a national inquiry on climate change. This was back in 2017. We actually took cognizance of a petition filed before the CHR. Yung petition was praying for an investigation on the responsibility of the so-called private carbon majors for allegedly contributing to climate change. And it has been further asserted na yung climate change is actually impacting the human rights of Filipinos. So the CHR conducted this national inquiry to look deeper into the petition. And it is novel in its attempt kasi ito ang first global petition na mag-recognize ng climate change na nakaka-affect siya sa human rights. And with this inquiry, we sought to promote as well as the notion that businesses have obligation to respect human rights. Yon ay enunciated doon sa United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, kung saan napapaloob yung protect, respect, and remedy framework. So doon sa mismong issue ng tampakan mining, we can also conduct, as we have said earlier, yung multi-sectoral dialogue. We have done that before involving mining companies sa Aroroy, Masbate and sa Nueva Vizcaya. So nagkakaroon tayo ng tuloy-tuloy na social dialogue again para ma-surface yung mga issues kasi we believe in participatory processes. Kailangan lahat ng concerned stakeholders, both duty bearers and rights holders ay nandoon sa dialogue para makita natin saan papasok yung obligations ng state, ano yung dapat nilang gawin, and yung sa rights holders para makapag-demand din sila ng accountability. Also, meron tayong binuo na National Human Rights Observatory, particularly sa IPs. Itong observatory na to is a repository of data and a monitoring platform. Dito sa observatory, makakakita tayo ng Supreme Court cases, yung mga relevant laws na particular sa IPs at saka sa environment. Meron din, nandoon din yung mga ibang cases na naka-file sa CHR. Meron din part ng observatory, particular sa environment and climate change. So ganon din ang magiging purpose niya. It's a resource center. So pwede tayo makakuha ng different mga information doon sa observatory para magamit natin, say, sa research natin or sa paglalobby natin ng mga batas kasama yung mga partners natin na or mga champions natin sa Congress. So, yun ang pwede nating maitulong. Mas importante ngayon yung concept ng business and human rights, no? Kasi I want to weave yung role ng businesses sa environmental degradation at saka climate change. Maraming businesses na nakaka-contribute sa environmental degradation. So kailangan ma-mainstream natin yung framework, yung business and human rights framework, not only sa private sectors but also sa government. Kasi yun nga sinabi natin na ang may primary duty to protect, promote, and fulfill human rights ay ang Estado. Sa part naman ng businesses, they have the responsibility to respect human rights. So dapat in their daily operations, napapaloob doon yung human rights principles, pati doon sa supply and value chain nila. So yun lang po. Thank you.
Salamat, Clarice. Lumalalim na yung usapan natin at yung mga topics na nadidiscuss. At for sure, meron pa tayong mga katanungan na susunod. At siguro maganda i-segue. Ay, Ma'am Amihilda, Cong.
Sagot kay Sam.
Sure po.
Actually, usapin ng climate change, ako nasa level na ako ng pag-iintindi na mukhang it is something that we all have to embrace now. We have to talk now of climate adaptation. That is the very reason why this representation, together with Deputy Speaker Mujiba Taman, filed the National Wetland Policy Bill. Kasi napansin natin, ang dami ng environmental laws that have been passed, and yet we have not looked into our wetlands. A lot of our lakes have been drying up. Some of our rivers, wala nang tubig, riverbed na lang. This means na even our policies in the executive, siguro there's a need for us to move towards not even climate proofing or resilience, but rather climate adaptation. Talagang nagbago ng ating klima. Now, sa usapin ng mining, ako ay hindi na mag-go beyond what was enunciated by my colleague, si Kong Argel Cabatbat. There's a need for us to look, probably review the mining policy of our government and look into, possibly pwede nating simulan as working draft or working lobbying policy na bibitbitin ng lobby group, probably to be headed by LRC, yung alternative mineral management bill. Tignan natin kung paano natin ma-strengthen yung bill. And this representation, yes, just like CHR, we believe in multi-stakeholder dialogues, in conversations. Now it's conversations and hosting. Because one of our key principles and one part of our framework of governance is really believe in participatory governance. Kahit yung aming mga policies and measures that we file in Congress, we ask the people what they need and not us telling the people what we have on hand and we offer it to them. No. Everything that we file, it has to come from the people. Yun, Sam, if you think that we could be partner with you, we have youth leaders in Davao region, like particularly in Davao de Oro. Baka pwedeng makapartner sa usapin ng iyong advokasya. Thank you so much, Dion.
Thank you, Kong. Yun po, LRC definitely will continue pushing po dito sa AMMB at makakasama natin yung mga network of young organizations katulad nila Sam sa Ateneo de Davao, yung Ecoteneo at Samahan. So we're looking forward to working with you para po ma-review po natin at may sulong po itong Alternative Minerals Management Bill. So siguro mag-segue na po ako sa isa pa nating youth representative. Mula naman siya ay isang councilor and secgen ng PUP Central na Konseho ng Mag-aaral at Vice President for External Affairs of SEED Network. Inaanyayahan ko si Aubrey Garganera para magbigay ng kanyang katanungan para sa ating mga resource persons. Aubrey?
Thank you so much po, Attorney Dion, sa pagpapakilala. So, ako po si Aubrey Garganera from PUP, isang leader estudyante and fellow advocate po ng climate justice and protection ng karapatan nating mga katubo. Ang tanong ko po, no, sayang umalis na si Congressman Cabatbat, sana lumalim rasyon natin dito. Yung una ko pong katanungan, recently po, no, nag-uusap na tayo ng climate change, binuksan na kanina yung topic on climate change. Recently po, nagpasa ng isang resolution ang House of Representatives na declaring climate emergency. No? So, this recent climate emergency resolution, are we going to see a promising development regarding climate and environmental related bills such as the bills na kinakampanya rin po ng RC like the AMMB and the Forest Resources Bill? Ayun po yung katanungan ko.
Anyone from our resource person, Klarise and Cong Amihilda, to respond to the question of Aubrey about the climate emergency and ano po yung mga initiative on the part of siguro medyo na naputol-putol lang, Aubrey, yung tanong. If I get it correctly, your question is about the climate emergency and considering that we are in the presently experiencing pandemic, how Congress or even CHR is doing its effort to respond, or what particular steps yung ginagawa ng Kongreso at CHR para ma-address itong concern regarding climate emergency.
Tama.
Can I respond po?
Yes, Clarice.
Yan. Okay. As na-discuss na po kanina, first, nagkaroon tayo ng National Inquiry on Climate Change. Yung final report po noon ay i-release natin, hopefully within the month. So yung National Inquiry on Climate Change, gusto po nating ma-establish doon kung paano nakakaapekto ang climate change sa human rights. Kasi may mga usapin na hindi directly nakaka-affect ang climate change sa human rights. So ang gusto natin sana mapakita doon sa inquiry na yon na ang climate change may malaking epekto sa iba't ibang karapatan ng tao. Lalong-lalo na merong mga marginalized and vulnerable sectors ang disproportionately affected by climate change because of their existing vulnerabilities. Number one na dyan yung indigenous peoples, dahil nga sinasabi natin na ang buhay nila ay intertwined sa lupa na kanilang nasasakupan. So doon din nila nagagawa ang kanilang livelihood, ang cultural practices nila. So currently meron tayong efforts na nag-establish tayo ng Human Rights Observatory. As already mentioned, it's a repository of data and a monitoring platform. And si CHR kasi, one of its constitutional mandate is to monitor the government's compliance to international human rights treaties and obligations. So sa ESCR Center, as a specialized center on economic, social, and cultural rights, what we do is we monitor yung government kung ano po ang ginagawa nila with respect to sa usapin natin sa environment and sa climate change. Nagkakandak tayo ng human rights monitoring. So bumababa tayo dun sa area kasama ang mga regional offices natin para tignan kung ano ang sitwasyon, say, ng indigenous peoples, ang persons with disabilities, at iba pang mga marginalized and vulnerable sectors para matignan natin kung paano tinutugunan ng gobyerno ang mga human rights situations nila. And also, meron tayong efforts on business and human rights kasi hindi natin ito pwedeng ilagay sa back burner. Kasi sabi nga natin, malaki ang kino-contribute ng business enterprises in terms of environmental degradation and climate change. So nagkakaroon tayo ng patuloy na discussions with private sectors and also with government agencies para ma-push natin yung pag-develop ng tinatawag nating National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. So sa ngayon, gumawa po kami ng isang guidance document para magamit ito na resource material ng lahat para mailapat o mai-align ng mga private sectors yung policies nila and their business operations sa human rights principles in the context of business. So malaking bagay ito kasi dito natin nasisimulan yung dito natin na co-continue yung conversation and discussion on the roles of businesses pati na rin ng states in terms in the context of business at saka ng human rights. Tapos gaya din na nasabi ko kanina, meron kaming mga social dialogue na kinakandak. Doon sa social dialogue, hindi lang yung pag-address ng issues ang ginagawa namin. Nagkakaroon din tayo ng nag-raise din tayo ng awareness doon sa mga affected communities, pati doon sa mga concerned government agencies, para sa gayon mai-align yung state policies sa human rights-based approaches. So kung wala man tayong national action plan sa ngayon, sana matulungan tayo ng mga government agencies na maging human rights, ma-align sa human rights-based approach yung mga polisiya at mga programa natin ngayon. So yun, sa ngayon, meron din kaming iba pang specialized center like yung Crisis, Conflict, and Humanitarian Protection. Sila, nakakatulong din sila sa monitoring ng mga internally displaced persons. Hindi lang ito displacement caused by climate change or yung mga natural disasters, displacement din caused by yung mga armed conflict. So kasama din natin sila sa pagmomonitor ng human rights situations ng mga Pilipino na nadi-displaced ng natural disasters. So yon, meron kaming na-receive na complaints, so nag-fact-finding investigations tayo kasama yung regional offices natin para makita kung legal aspect ng mga sitwasyon ng mga tao. So yon ang efforts ng Commission on Human Rights sa ngayon.
Maraming salamat, Klarise. Cong, yes, Cong.
Okay. As a response to Aubrey, tama po ba? Aubrey?
Ako, Aubrey.
Naibahan lang ako kasi lalaki, Aubrey. Sorry, Aubrey, actually, you've mentioned already kung ano yung naging response ng Congress, which is the passage of the Climate Emergency Resolution. Basically, what it provides is, first and foremost, alam natin kung gaano katindi ang nangyari nung nagsunod-sunod si Rolly at yung and if you look back, ang dami pang typhoons na dumaan sa ating bansa. We have the disasters din na Yolanda in 2013, the Onda and Piping in 2009, Reming in 2006. We have Pablo and Sendong which devastated Mindanao. Hindi namin makakalimutan yung Sendong sa Mindanao. We have El Nino in 2015 2016. So ang daming climate change na nakita natin, na-witness natin. Something has to be done. That's why if you look at it, sa nangyari po sa Cagayan Valley, may ongoing na congressional inquiry in aid of legislation. Then we have to ensure integration and convergence of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts through the passage of the bill which seeks to create the Department of Disaster Resilience. But we have to bear in mind this DDR bill basically looks into disasters which are not human induced, because human induced will basically be handled by the Office of Civil Defense. It's still one of their functions. And then of course, probably institutionalization of the whole of government or the whole of nation or the whole of society approach to address the issue on climate change, which gaya ng sinabi ko kanina kay Sam, it's more on climate adaptation na po tayo ngayon and mitigation efforts. It's something that we all have to embrace. Masakit man siyang tanggapin, pero it is something that probably, ito yung sinabi ko sa aking opening statement kanina, na there are some decisions probably in the past that now we are to endure the consequences, and probably something that may be painful for us to embrace, but something that we all have to work together to ensure that our young generation still to come would still enjoy the same environment that we are enjoying still right now. I hope I was able to answer the question of Aubrey. Siguro kung before ko i-unmute ang sarili ko, Aubrey, ang tanong ko nga is, are you supportive of the passage of the resolution? Ang ating mga kabataan, do you think that's one thing that we need to hear? We need feedback mechanism from the young people para alam din namin if we are on the right track in addressing your concerns, because more than we siguro, mas kayo ang nakakita what future you wanted for yourselves.
Thank you, Cong. Alam ko po lumagpas na tayo sa oras natin, pero lubusin na po namin. Okay lang po ba one last question both from Aubrey tsaka kay Rojan? Siguro unahin ko si Aubrey and then tawagin ko si Rojan for their one last question for Cong Amihilda at kay Klarise. Aubrey?
Yeah, thank you po. And actually, in response sa tanong ni Cong Amihilda, no, and yes, actually we support that resolution. It's a welcoming development. Kaya nga po yung tanong ko kanina is that a start of series of bills na ine-expect natin pro climate change adaptation and mitigation talaga? So for my last question po, no, in line with that po, gusto ko lang po sana tanungin, can we have maybe a glimpse kung ano po, kamusta po yung budget ng ating Department of Environment and Natural Resources, since yun po ang pangunahing ahensya natin na mangunguna sa pag-response sa climate crisis. Are we expecting more aggressive na mga flagship na mga programa, lalo na't nabanggit niyo po, no, na meron Department of Disaster Resilience and ngayon po namang Sierra Madre Development Authority na ginagawa. So ano po bang ine-expect natin ngayon na we are in a climate emergency? Mayroon po ba tayong mga inaasahan na mga flagship na mga programa sa DNR and other agencies for that matter po? Thank you.
Thank you. Siguro bago ko po i-ask kayo to respond, kunin ko na lang din po yung kay Rojan para isang response na lang. At makatipid sa oras. Kung okay lang po. Rojan, siguro yung last question mo para ma-erase na natin ngayon.
Yes, good morning po ulit sa lahat. Well, ang tanong ko po ay para po kay Congressman Cabatbat. Ito pa ba siya?
Congressman Cabatbat already left the Zoom room, Rojan. Baka si Cong Sangcopan can also answer.
Sige. Ito po ay tumutukoy sa Indigenous agricultural practices po naming mga Tidurayat ng Bangyan.
Rojan, pwede na medyo palakasan lang yung boses para mas klaro.
Yes po. Ang tanong ko po ay ganito. Kaming mga Tidurayat Lambangyan Indigenous peoples sa Maguindanao ay may sistemang food sovereignty at agroecology na tinatawag namin itong sulagad. Congressman, yung sasagot mamaya, bilang kinatawan po ng magsasaka sa Pilipinas o si Ma'am, no, sa anak Mindanao, ano pong suporta ang maaari naming idulog sa inyo upang mas mapalago ang indigenous agricultural practices po? Yun po ang tanong ko. Salamat.
Sige, thank you Aubrey and Rojan. I-recap ko lang po for our resource person. Yung tanong po ni Aubrey is regarding po sa budget ng DNR at ano yung mga flagship program. Tsaka ano tong rational ng Sierra Madre Development Authority at yung mga other programs para po sa protection of the environment. At yung kay Rojan naman ay regarding po doon sa food sovereignty program, yung kanilang indigenous practice na tinatawag na sulagad, ano po yung pwedeng suporta na pwede nilang idulog sa Kongreso at maging sa CHR. Siguro unahin natin si Ma'am Amihilda to respond.
Okay. Unahin kong sagutin yung tanong ni Rojan tungkol sa kung anong pwede namin itulong sa inyo on your sustainable agricultural practice. Rojan, kung meron kayong project proposal na nais ninyong i-endorso natin sa Department of Agriculture, bukas po ang aking tanggapan. We'll be willing to endorse that. And then probably upuan po natin together with the Department of Agriculture if they could possibly get from their own funds and consider yung inyong sustainable agricultural practice. Pwede ba yun? Is it okay with
Yes
you,
po,
Roger?
yes po.
Antayin ko yung
Sige po.
proposal. So dalawa po ang way forward natin with the Tiduray Lambangian tribe in Maguindanao. With regards to the question of Aubrey, ulit yun.
Tinatanong niya po yung kung
budget ng DNR.
Yes po.
Yung budget ng DNR. Right now kasi nasa bicameral conference stage pa lang yung budget for fiscal year 2021. So probably pag naipasa na po siya, Aubrey, I can get back to you. But I would suggest maybe as a follow-through activity for this inspiring LRC-led na activity, diyon probably baka pwede tayo magkaroon ng isang session together with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Sana nga ini-involve nila ang mga kabataan katulad ninyo sa pag-prepare nila ng kanilang budget. Come January or February, probably our President would be calling for budget. It's going to be the budget call season. So kung may mga sa tingin kayo na pwede natin endorso sa DNR as alternative budget for them, then gaya ng sinabi namin mula kanina, bukas po ang aming tanggapan. I mean, bukas na bukas po siya for everyone to come and then help us in policy making. With regards to the Sierra Madre, I'd be very honest, I've got no idea because I'm more focused on Mindanao, Aubrey, but I would love to study that. And if you have papers that you think I need to study para mas maintindihan ko, I would be willing to travel this road with you para tingnan natin kung anong pwede natin mapagtulungan. As Partylist representative kasi medyo nafo-focus ka, lalo pa tayo ay nag-represent ng Mindanao. So, yun. That hope I was able to answer somehow responsibly the concern of Aubrey. Ang pinaka-importante, talagang sana isa sa mga baging prinsipyo nating mga kabataan is yung pagbubukas ng ating pinto sa participatory governance. Gaya ng sinasabi ng CHR, malaking bagay ang bawat dialogo na ginagawa natin with our government. We are just here to bridge our government to the grassroots level communities and peoples kasi para masigurado natin na ramdam ng bawat Filipino ang kanilang gobyerno sa bawat minuto at segundo ng kanilang buhay. So yun lang, maraming salamat.
Thank you, Cong, for that response. And well noted po yung dalawang action steps for our follow-through. Maybe Klarise can also respond to the two questions.
Regarding dun sa programs ng DNR, siguro ako, I'm not in the best position to speak for these government agencies, but what we want sana robust programs for environment conservation and disaster risk management, no, especially sa preparation side ng cycle. Malaking bagay yon kasi para lagi natin sinasabi na resilient yung Filipinos, pero parang nagiging norm na lang na napanangga natin yung resilient yung Filipinos, pero kailangan natin talagang pagpreparahan lahat ng disasters na darating. So yung mga programs natin dapat mas inclined siya dun sa preparation side ng disaster risk management. In terms naman doon sa tanong ni I'm sorry, nakalimutan ko yung pangalan niya. Rojan, thank you. Rojan, kung naabutan mo yung opening statement ko kanina, binibigyan namin ng importansya yung indigenous knowledge systems and practices. Doon makakatulong ng malaki ang youth, lalo na sa pag-preserve, no, at pag-maintain ng indigenous practices nyo at kung paano natin matransmit sa iba pang mga generations. Now, pwede tayong makatulong sa pagpapopularize nitong mga indigenous knowledge systems and practices ninyo. Kasama natin ang mga regional offices, pati ang ibang stakeholders. Nasabi ko rin kanina, yung IKSP ay importante, lalong-lalo na sa environment conservation, kasi nga kayo ang may karanasan sa lupa. So kayo ang may first-hand na experience kung paano nyo napapangalagaan ng lupa, yung mga crops ninyo, yung mga produce ninyo. So, dapat lang no na ma-preserve natin sila. Ang iniisip nga namin to ensure na dun sa educational practices nyo, maipasok din doon ang discussion ng indigenous knowledge systems and practices at hindi lang yung mga current na curriculum na meron tayo. So we have also to take in consideration yung mga itong mga practices ninyo sa pagtuturo sa education, hindi lang yung mainstream education na ginagawa ng Department of Education. So, para ma-ensure din yung cultural adaptability doon sa area kung saan kayo located. So, yun. Doon tayo pwedeng makapasok. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cong and Clarice, for that response. Ayun, tawag nito, lumampas na tayo sa oras, but we are very thankful for your generosity na magbahagi ng mga response sa mga katanungan ng mga IP youth leaders. Ngayon naman, siguro last na lang, si Sam gusto niya lang i-promote yung kanilang event, tayo next week on December 14 sa Ateneo de Davao. Meron din silang signature campaign, yung tampakan.adu.edu.ph para i-resist nga yung tampakan gold and copper mining. And perhaps we can also share with you yung kanilang event. Sam, okay ba yun na ma-share natin din sa kanila? And yun, maraming baon, maraming action steps, siguro ganado, inspired, but at the same time, hindi natin hindi natin kinakalimutan yung mga issues, mga concerns, mga karamihan dyan ay masalimuot, malungkot, pero mahanap tayo ng paraan para ma-address natin itong mga concerns ng mga indigenous people, the youth and the partner communities natin. At siguro bago i-close natin itong programang ito, na gusto ko lang sabihin na yung mga resource persons natin ay naging bukas yung kanilang opisina para makipagtulungan sa ating mga IP partner communities. Ngayon, aanyayahan ko na ulit yung aming Executive Director sa Legal Rights and Natural Resources Center, si Mai, for the closing remarks. Mai?
Maraming salamat, Dion. Once again, salamat po sa pagpapaunlak. LRC thought of this town hall with young leaders and our not so young leaders, because we are at a juncture in our human history, with the climate emergency, really at the precipice of our species' existence. And it is the young that will bear the brunt of the decisions being made today. Maganda po yung sinabi ni Congresswoman Amihilda kanina, we borrow our world from our children. Young people are often talked down, lectured to. As elders, we ask them to follow in our footsteps. That our representatives here today invite questioning of the system, demand changes and accountability of themselves, of our leaders. We take this as good examples in humility, graciousness, and openness, traits, unfortunately, that are gravely lacking in our leadership today. And so we welcome this and are heartened by this, and we ardently hope that this relationship and dialogue continue. The issues Indigenous peoples face are complicated and increasingly challenging. For example, the opposing notions of development. Kanina, Congressman Argel mentioned Bhutan, where their forests are valued for being forests and not transformed into logs and other commercial products. In our case, we see the increasing securitizing of development and resource utilization amidst calamities that the countries continuously face. All these and others stand to impact not just Indigenous communities, but our community, our collective community, our nation, our world. Kaya salamat po sa pakikiisa. Ang mahabang pangalan po namin ay Legal Rights and Natural Resources Center, Friends of the Earth. Ngayon, sana ay nagdagdagan ng mga kaibigan, kasama sa kalikasan. Muli po, daghang salamat. See you, Baggy.
Ayun, maraming salamat po ulit sa ating mga resource person, kay Kong Argel, Kong Amihilda, Clarice, and sa recorded message ni Kong Alfred, at of course sa ating mga IP Youth representative, kay Jess, kay Sam, kay Rojan, and kay Aubrey. Maraming salamat sa pag-participate and makakaasa po kayo doon sa mga action steps. Mangungulit po siguro kami doon sa mga nabanggit kanina. So maraming salamat po ulit at siguro sa mga susunod pa pong event na maanyayahan namin po kayo na maging resource person or sa mga follow-through activities po natin. Thank you po ulit. And of course sa ating mga kay Maya, kay Jen at kay Shelly sa ating mga technical people na naging smooth yung ating live event ngayon. Salamat po ulit.
Maraming salamat.